The lawyer slid the envelope across the desk like he was passing her something that might bite. Inside was a single brass key, old, scratched, smaller than her thumb, with no tag, no number, no markings of any kind. No address, no name, no deed. Just one folded sheet of paper in handwriting she had not seen in 11 years. And on that paper, 3 sentences. Do not tell anyone you have this. Do not go alone the first time. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. And whatever you find, decide for yourself before anyone else gets to decide for you. Maren Holloway sat in that office in a borrowed blazer 2 sizes too large for her shoulders, with $31 in her checking account, an eviction notice folded inside her purse, and a 6-year-old son waiting at her sister-in-law's apartment because she could not afford a babysitter. She had come expecting nothing. She had come because the letter from the law firm said her grandfather had died, and a small bequest had been left in her name, and small was the word that had told her exactly what to brace for. A photograph, maybe. A pocket watch. A box of papers she would have to pay to ship. Instead, she was holding a key that fit nothing she had ever seen, and a warning written in the same hand that used to write her name on the paper bags of biscuits he sent home with her when she was 9 years old, before the family fell apart and the silence began. The lawyer was an older man named Whitfield, soft around the middle, careful around the eyes, and he watched her hold that key the way a person watches someone open a package they have been told contains something delicate. He waited until she lifted her gaze from the paper, and then he cleared his throat in the careful way of men who have learned that legal work requires a certain kind of silence before any words are added to it. Your grandfather left specific instructions, he said. The instructions are unusual. He did not register a property under your name. He did not leave a deed. He did not leave a bank account I can release to you today. What he did leave is in that envelope, and a second envelope I am instructed to hand over only after you confirm in writing that you understand what you are accepting. Maren stared at him. What am I accepting? She asked, and Whitfield looked down at the file in front of him, and then back up at her with an expression that struck her as somewhere between sympathy and warning. He said, I am not entirely certain. I only know that he was very particular, and that he believed someone might try to interfere if the matter was not handled exactly as he wished. Then he passed her a single sheet of paper, a release form, and a pen, and he waited. She did not sign right away. She held the key in her left hand and the pen in her right, and she thought about the eviction notice in her purse, and about her son Eli, who had asked her that morning if he could have cereal for dinner, because cereal was a dinner sometimes. And she had said yes the way she always said yes to that question now, because it was cheaper than telling the truth. She thought about the $740 she owed the landlord, and the $400 she owed the daycare, and the way her car had been making a sound for 3 weeks that she could not afford to investigate. And then she thought about her grandfather, Hollis Holloway, who had not spoken to her mother in 12 years before he died, who had sent her exactly 2 letters in her entire adult life, the last one when Eli was born, and inside that letter had been $40 and $20 bills, and a single line that said, I am sorry, I am not better at this. Use it for the boy. She had used it for diapers. She had not written back. She had wanted to. She had not known how to begin. And now he was dead, and the only thing he had left her was a key without a lock and a warning without an explanation. She signed the paper. Whitfield slid the second envelope across the desk. The second envelope was thicker, made of a heavier paper, and sealed with wax the color of dried blood. Maren broke the seal with her thumbnail and unfolded the contents on her lap. Inside was a hand-drawn map, careful but not professional, the lines of a man who had been a contractor most of his life and who could read a property from the way the ground rolled under his boots. The map showed a road she did not recognize, a turnoff marked with a small careful X, and a distance written in his crooked handwriting. 3.5 miles past the second iron gate. There was no town named. There was no county. There was a smaller note at the bottom corner, written in pencil and pressed in deeper than the rest, as if he had wanted it to outlast everything else on the paper. The note said, The inn is yours. The cellar is the reason. Do not let the bank, the county, or your mother know it exists until you have decided what to do. Maren read the note twice, then a third time, and the office around her seemed to thin out, the way rooms do when something underneath your life shifts without warning. The inn. Her grandfather had owned an inn. She had not known this. Her mother had not told her this. Her mother had told her, once, that the old man owned a piece of land somewhere up in the hill country that was worth nothing and had never been worth anything and would never be worth anything. And that was the end of that conversation and the end of any further conversation about him for the rest of Maren's adolescence. She looked up at Whitfield. He was watching her the way you watch someone read a diagnosis. The drive home took an hour. She did not remember any of it. She remembered turning the key over in her pocket at every red light, feeling its weight against the lining, feeling the small ridges of its teeth. She remembered passing the daycare and not stopping because Eli was with Carla, and she was not ready to look at him yet, not until she had decided what she was going to do with the information now sitting in her purse. She remembered the gas gauge dropping into the red zone and pulling into the station on Magnolia Street and putting in $7 because $7 was what she had to spare, and $7 would get her through the week if she did not drive anywhere that was not work or Eli's school. The clerk behind the counter at the gas station gave her a look she had been receiving for 2 years now, the look that said he recognized her, that he had watched her count out change in dimes the week before, that he was not going to say anything, but that he was thinking it. She drove the rest of the way to Carla's apartment without the radio on, because the radio made it harder to think, and she needed to think. Carla opened the door with Eli on her hip, even though he was too big to be carried anymore. But Carla carried him anyway, because Carla was that kind of woman, the kind who picked children up even when her back hurt. She was Maren's late husband's older sister, and she had been the only person in either family who had stayed close after the funeral. She took one look at Maren's face and stepped aside without asking what was wrong. Eli wriggled down and ran to wrap his arms around his mother's legs, and Maren bent and pressed her face into his hair and breathed him in for a long moment. The smell of crayons and apple juice and the cheap shampoo Carla used. She straightened, met Carla's eyes, and said, "Can he watch a show in the bedroom for a minute?" Carla nodded once and turned on the small television in the back room and closed the door, and then she sat down at her kitchen table across from Maren and said, "What happened?" Maren laid the key on the table. She laid the map beside it. She said, "I think my grandfather left me a building, and I think he was afraid of what would happen when I found it." Carla picked up the map first. She read it slowly, the way she read everything, moving her finger along the lines, looking up once to check Maren's face, and then looking back down. She was a paralegal at a firm 2 towns over. She knew how to read a document. She knew how to spot the spaces in a document where something was missing on purpose. When she put the map down, she said, "This is not legal title. This is a sketch. He did not record this property in your name. He left you a key and a drawing and a note. Anyone could come along tomorrow and contest this, and you would have nothing." Maren nodded. She had already understood this. She said, "I know." Carla picked up the note next, and her face changed when she read the last sentence. She read it twice. Then she said, "Why does he not want your mother to know?" Maren said, "I do not know." Carla said, "You are going to have to find out, and you are going to have to find out before she does, because if there is anything there, anything at all, your mother will come for it." Maren did not answer. There was nothing to answer. Her mother had not called her in 14 months. Her mother had not called when Eli was sick last winter. Her mother had not called when Maren's husband died 3 years ago in a warehouse accident that took 6 weeks to settle with no settlement at the end. Her mother had taught her, very thoroughly, that family was a word people used when they wanted something. And now her grandfather, who had not been allowed near her since she was 12 years old, who had been cut off by his own daughter, who had died with no one in the room, had reached across the silence and handed her a warning written in the only handwriting that had ever made her feel safe. She did not go that night. She did not have the gas. She did not have the courage. She put Eli to bed in the apartment that she had until the end of the month and not a day longer, and she sat on the floor of his room with her back against his bed and watched him breathe, the way she had watched him breathe every night for 6 years, and she thought about the key. She thought about the second iron gate. She thought about the words "the cellar is the reason." She did not sleep. At 2 in the morning, she went into the kitchen and made coffee, and she opened the manila folder Whitfield had handed her on the way out, and she read every page in it, slowly, twice. There was a photocopy of a deed dated 1974, made out to Hollis Holloway, for a property described only by parcel number, in a county she had heard of but had never visited. There was a tax document showing the property had been kept current, paid in cash, every year, all the way through to the previous spring. There was a brief, handwritten inventory list that meant nothing to her. 3 trunks, 2 crates, the Lyle box, a line item that just said, in his careful capital letters, for the girl. She did not know if the girl was her. She did not know if it was her mother, in some sentence written when her mother was still the girl. She closed the folder. She watched the sky get light through the kitchen window. She made a decision. She left at 6 the next morning with Eli in the back seat in his car seat, half asleep, his stuffed rabbit clamped under his arm. She had not told Carla where she was going. She had told her she had errands. She had filled the tank with the last of the cash from her checking account, which had left her with $11.46, and she had packed a thermos of coffee and 2 peanut butter sandwiches in a juice box. Because if she was going to drive 3 hours into the hill country to look at a building she did not own and might never own, she was going to do it with her son in the car, because her son was the only thing in her life that she trusted not to leave. The road out of the city thinned slowly. Strip malls became gas stations became farms. Farms became long stretches of fence line broken only by mailboxes with hand-painted numbers and the occasional sign for honey or eggs. Eli fell asleep before they had been driving an hour. Maren turned the heat up because the car was old and the heater only worked at one setting, and she drove the road her grandfather had drawn in pencil 60 years ago and never told anyone about. The first iron gate appeared exactly where the map said it would. It was an old farm gate, rust-eaten, hanging open on one hinge, the kind of gate that had stopped being a gate years ago and was now just a marker. She slowed to a crawl, checking the map against the odometer, counting miles. She passed a creek. She passed a stand of black walnut trees that looked older than her grandfather would have been. She passed an abandoned silo leaning at a quiet angle toward the south, the way old buildings lean when they have made peace with falling. The second iron gate appeared in a curve she almost missed. This one was closed. This one had a chain wrapped around the post, padlocked. The chain rusted, but the padlock newer, brighter, the kind of padlock that meant someone had cared enough to replace it. Maren stopped the car. She got out. She walked to the padlock. She took the brass key out of her pocket. She slid it in. It turned. The driveway beyond the gate was a long curving track of gravel that had not been graded in years, but it was passable. She drove it slowly with Eli still sleeping in the back seat, his small face pressed against the window, his breath fogging the glass. The trees rose up on both sides, oak and hickory and the occasional pine, and the track curved around a low hill and then opened out into a clearing, and there, set against the far slope of the hill, was the building. It was bigger than she had expected, 2 stories wide, with a long covered porch that ran the entire length of the front. The siding was old painted wood, white once, gray now, peeling in places, but the bones of the building stood square and true. The roof was missing shingles and patches. One of the upper windows was boarded over with plywood. A wisteria vine had eaten the railing on the east end of the porch, completely, the way a slow fire eats a piece of paper. A sign hung at an angle near the front steps, a wooden sign with hand-routed letters, faded so badly she had to get out and walk up to it to read what it said. The sign said, Holloway's Rest. Below the name, in smaller letters, it said, Established 1948. Below that, in even smaller letters, it said, Closed. She stood in front of the sign for a long time. Eli woke up in the car and pressed his face against the window and pointed at the building and asked if it was a haunted house. She told him no. She told him it was a place her grandfather used to own. He asked if her grandfather was a ghost now. She told him probably not. She unbuckled him and lifted him out of the car and held him on her hip, even though he was getting heavy, even though her arms were already tired from the drive, and she walked up the steps of the porch with him, slowly, testing each board for the soft places. The boards held. The front door was solid oak, weathered, set with a heavy lock plate. The keyhole was the same size as the key in her pocket. She set Eli down on the porch and told him to stay where she could see him, and she took out the key, and she fitted into the lock. It turned with a small, clean click, like something old recognizing the hand that had been promised it. The door opened into a long entry hall with a wide staircase rising on the right and a parlor opening on the left. The air inside was cool and dry and smelled like cedar and old paper and the faint sweetness of beeswax. There was furniture under sheets, the way you cover furniture when you mean to come back. There was a brass coat rack standing by the door with one wool coat still hanging on it, a man's coat, dark green, the size her grandfather would have worn. There was a small table beside the staircase with a glass dome on it, and inside the dome was a single white rose pressed flat between two squares of card. She stood in the doorway and held Eli's hand and did not breathe for several seconds because the building did not feel abandoned. It felt waiting. There is a difference between a building that no one has lived in and a building that has been kept. This building had been kept. The dust on the floor was thin and even, not the heavy carpet of dust you find in places that have been left for years. Someone had been here. Someone had walked these floors, swept the entry hall, wound the clock that was now silent on the parlor mantel. Her grandfather had been 78 when he died. He had not driven himself to this property recently, so someone else had. She moved through the rooms with Eli on her hip again because she did not want him out of her sight. The parlor was wide and low-ceilinged, with two long windows facing the porch and a stone fireplace at the far end. The dining room ran behind it, set with a long table covered in a linen cloth and 12 chairs, all matching, all polished. The kitchen at the back of the house was older than she had expected, with a green enamel stove and a deep porcelain sink and a row of copper pots hanging on iron hooks above the work counter. There was a calendar pinned to the wall by the back door. The calendar was from the year of her grandfather's death. The month was open to September. He had circled a date with a red pencil. The date was the day before he died. Beside the circle, in the small square allotted to that day, he had written 4 words. She comes. Stay quiet. Maren stared at the calendar for a long time. She did not know what it meant. She did not know if the she was her, or the she was her mother, or the she was someone else entirely. She did not know if stay quiet was a warning to himself or to the house. She lifted Eli higher on her hip and walked to the door at the side of the kitchen, the narrow door that she had been avoiding without meaning to, because she already knew. She already knew that door was the cellar door, because every old house has a cellar door, and her grandfather's note had said, "The cellar is the reason." The door opened to a flight of wooden stairs descending into darkness. There was a brass switch on the wall at the top of the stairs. She flipped it. A bare bulb came on at the bottom of the stairs, weak, yellow, casting just enough light to see the steps. She did not go down. She closed the door. She turned the small iron hook that latched it from the kitchen side. She walked back through the dining room and the parlor and the entry hall, and she carried her son out onto the porch, and she sat down on the top step of the porch with him in her lap, and she put her face into his hair and stayed there for a long time. He did not ask what was wrong. He patted her arm, the way he did when he could tell something had pressed on her without knowing the shape of the thing. She did not cry. She had not cried in front of him in 3 years, and she did not intend to start now. But she sat there until her breathing slowed, until the wind moved through the wisteria, until she felt the weight of the building behind her and understood that whatever was waiting in that cellar was waiting for her specifically, and she was not going to look at it with her 6-year-old son in her arms. She drove back to the city. She drove most of the way in silence. Eli ate his peanut butter sandwich in the back seat and asked her 3 times if they could come back to the haunted house, and she said yes, and she meant it, but she did not say when. She dropped him off with Carla, and she did not tell Carla where she had been because she did not yet know what she had seen. She went back to her apartment, and she sat on her kitchen floor with the map and the key and the note in front of her, and she made a list. The list had 4 items. Number 1. Find someone who can ride out there with me who I can trust. Number 2. Find out who has been maintaining the property. Number 3. Find out if my mother has any legal claim. Number 4. Do not tell my mother. She underlined the 4th item twice. She made the underline so hard it tore the paper. The next morning, she called Whitfield. She told him she had been to the property. She told him the building was still standing and that someone had been keeping it up, and she asked him if he knew who. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Whitfield said, "Your grandfather employed a caretaker. The caretaker was paid through a separate account that I did not handle. I am not authorized to give you that name without further documentation, but I can tell you that the payments have been continuing, and that they will continue until the end of this calendar year, regardless of what you decide to do." Maren asked, "Who is the caretaker?" Whitfield said, "I am not authorized." Maren asked, "Will you tell me if I come in?" He said, "Come in." She went in that afternoon. Whitfield had laid out a small file on the desk by the time she arrived. He did not slide it across to her. He looked at her for a long moment, the way he had looked at her 2 days before when he had passed her the second envelope. And then he said, "The caretaker is a woman named Iris Tovey. She is 71 years old. She has been employed by your grandfather since 1981. She lives approximately 4 miles from the property on a small holding she inherited from her parents. She is paid in cash every quarter by an arrangement that does not require her to know any of the names involved beyond your grandfather's." He stopped. Then he said, "I will tell you something I am not supposed to tell you. Your grandfather asked me, the last time he was in this office, to make sure that if anyone came looking for the inn after his death, it would not be his daughter, and it would be his granddaughter. He said his daughter would sell it inside a week. He said his granddaughter would not." Maren did not say anything. Whitfield turned the file around and slid it across the desk. Inside was an address. The address was for Iris Tovey. He said, "She will not come to you. You will have to go to her. And she will not speak to you until she is satisfied that you are who you say you are." Maren took the address. She drove home. She put the address in her purse beside the key. She did not sleep that night either. The next day was a Saturday. Carla took Eli for the morning because Eli loved Carla's apartment and Carla loved having him. Maren drove the 3 hours again. She passed the first iron gate. She unlocked the second iron gate. She drove the gravel track to the inn. This time she did not go inside. She drove past the inn, following a smaller track that the map showed continuing east through the trees, and after 1.5 miles the track came out onto a county road, and a 1/4 mile down that road was a mailbox that said, in painted letters, Tovey. The house behind the mailbox was a small clapboard farmhouse with a chicken coop on one side and a herb garden on the other and a thin stream of smoke coming from the kitchen chimney. Maren parked on the shoulder. She walked up the dirt path. She knocked on the door. The door opened. The woman who stood in the doorway was small, thin, sharp-eyed, with a long gray braid pulled over one shoulder, and she looked at Maren for almost a full minute before she said anything. Then she said, "You have his mouth. Come in." Maren stepped inside. The door closed behind her, and Iris Tovey, who had been keeping the inn for 43 years, walked her into the kitchen, sat her down at a small wooden table, poured her a cup of black coffee without asking, and said, "I have been waiting for you for 11 years. Maren held the cup with both hands because her hands had started to shake somewhere between the porch and the kitchen, and she did not want Iris Tovey to see it. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and wood smoke and the faintly metallic scent of well water that has been drawn from a deep, slow source. There were 2 cats on the windowsill, an orange one and a gray one, both watching her the way cats watch a thing they have not decided about yet. Iris sat down across from her, took her own cup of coffee, did not drink it, and waited. After a moment, Maren said, 11 years. Iris nodded once. "He told me, after the falling out with your mother, that one day his granddaughter would come up that road. He told me what she would look like. He told me she would have a child, probably a boy, probably young. He told me she would arrive with a key and a map and a face that did not know what it had inherited. He said when that happened, I was to make her sit down, and I was to drink coffee with her, and I was to tell her what the building actually is, before she decided whether to keep it." Maren said, "What is it?" Iris looked at her over the rim of her cup for a long beat. Then she said, "The inn is the cover. The cellar is the inheritance. And your grandfather knew, as he knew the shape of his own hand, that the moment your mother found out what was in that cellar, she would tear it apart with her teeth." Maren set the coffee cup down. She said, "I need to know what is in the cellar." Iris said, "You will. I will take you tomorrow, when you can come alone and stay through the afternoon, and we will go down together, and I will tell you everything I know. But first, today, you will sit here, and you will let me tell you about him, because if you go down those stairs without understanding why he kept what he kept, you will misread every single thing you see." Maren nodded. She did not trust herself to speak. Iris poured her more coffee, even though she had barely touched the first cup, and Iris began to talk, in the slow, patient voice of a woman who had been carrying a story for 43 years and had been told, very strictly, not to set it down until the right person walked through her door. She talked about the inn in the 1950s, when it had been full every weekend, when Hollis Holloway had been a young man with a young wife and a small daughter, and the inn had been a country stop on a road that had since been bypassed. She talked about the slow death of the road and the slow death of the trade, and the way Hollis had kept the inn open out of stubbornness for years after it stopped paying for itself. She talked about Hollis's wife dying in 1968, and Hollis raising his daughter alone, and the daughter, Maren's mother, growing up to want nothing to do with the inn or the road or the country or the man who had loved her without knowing how to talk to her. And then Iris said, in 1973, your grandfather bought the contents of an estate from a family who had owed him money for many years. The family was old, and the estate was older, and the family wanted the debt forgiven, and they wanted the contents gone from their house before the rest of the relatives arrived for the funeral. Your grandfather agreed. He took 3 trunks, 2 crates, and a wooden box the family called the Lyle box. He brought them back here. He put them in the cellar. He opened them, alone, over the course of a week. And by the end of that week, he had understood what he had bought, and he had understood that he could not tell anyone, because the family who had sold it to him had not understood it, and if they had understood it, they would have come for it. Maren said, "What was it?" Iris held her gaze. Then she said, "I am not going to tell you that today. I am going to take you down there tomorrow, and you are going to see it with your own eyes. Because I have learned, over 43 years, that some things lose their truth the moment you describe them with your mouth." They sat in the kitchen until the light began to slant low through the window over the sink. And then Iris stood and walked her to the door and put a hand on her arm and said, "You will come back tomorrow at noon. You will come alone. You will leave your boy with someone you trust. And you will not, under any circumstances, tell your mother where you are." Maren said, "I have not spoken to my mother in 14 months. Iris said, "That is exactly the kind of thing that changes the day someone in your family dies. Do not assume the silence will hold." Maren nodded. She walked to her car. She drove back to the city. She stopped at a payphone outside a gas station because her cell phone had been cut off 2 weeks ago, and she called Carla, and she told Carla that she was going to need her to keep Eli overnight tomorrow, and Carla, who had never asked for an explanation in her life, said yes, and asked only whether Maren was safe. Maren said, "I think so. I think I am about to be more safe than I have been in a long time." Carla, on the other end of the line, said quietly, "I hope you are right." That night Maren sat on the floor of her apartment with the eviction notice in front of her, and she did the math one more time. The math she had been doing every night for 2 weeks. She owed $740 on the rent. She had been told she had until the 15th, which was 8 days away, to pay it in full or leave. She had no way of paying it in full. She had $31 in the checking account and $11 in her wallet, and the gas in her car was already paid for, and she had nothing else. She had no family she could ask. She had a sister-in-law who would have given her every dollar she had. But Carla had her own rent and her own son and her own life on a knife's edge, and Maren had decided years ago that she would sleep in her car before she would take money from the only person in her family who had not already broken her trust. She looked at the key on the floor beside the eviction notice. She did not know yet what was in the cellar. She did not know if it was worth $1 or worth 1,000 or worth nothing at all. But she knew, with the kind of certainty that does not require evidence, that her grandfather had not driven a stranger through 43 years of secrecy to leave her something that would not change her life. He had told the lawyer her mother would tear it apart with her teeth. He had told Iris to wait 11 years to meet her. He had circled the date on a calendar in red pencil and written, "She comes, stay quiet." Whatever was down those wooden stairs, in the cellar of the inn called Holloway's Rest, was not a pocket watch and a box of papers. It was the thing he had been holding for her, in silence, for over 50 years. She slept that night for the first time in 3 days. She slept hard. She dreamed of her grandfather, which she had not done since she was 12. In the dream, he was standing in the kitchen of the inn, in front of the green enamel stove, and he was wearing the dark green wool coat that was still hanging on the rack inside the front door, and he was holding out his hand to her, and his hand was full of something she could not quite see, something that was small and old and gleamed faintly, and he was smiling at her the way he had smiled at her when she was 9 years old, when he had handed her a paper bag of biscuits and told her, in the gentle, careful voice he had used only with her, that she was the smartest of the children in their family, and that he had decided long ago to keep his good things for the smart ones, because the loud ones already had enough. She woke at 5 and lay in bed without moving for almost an hour, watching the ceiling go from black to gray to the dull color of unwashed linen. Eli was still asleep in the bed beside hers. She had brought him to her own room 3 months ago when she had given his mattress to a neighbor who needed it more, and she had not had the money to replace it. And Eli had not complained, because Eli did not complain, because Eli had inherited from somewhere a kind of patience that was not normal for a 6-year-old, and she sometimes lay awake at night and felt grateful for it, and ashamed of being grateful for it in equal measure. She watched him breathe. She watched the small movement of his eyelashes as he dreamed. And she thought about the inn, and about the cellar, and about a man named Maren Holloway who had loved her in a careful private way for the first 12 years of her life, and then had been forbidden to speak to her, and who had still, in the end, kept the thing he had kept, because he had believed, somehow, that she would find her way to it. She got Eli up at 7. She made him toast with the last of the peanut butter and gave him the last juice box from the case Carla had sent home with her the week before. She told him he was going to spend the night at Aunt Carla's, and his face lit up the way it always did at that news, and she felt the small familiar pang of a mother who has learned to be glad when her child loves someone else, because that love is a roof when she cannot provide one. She packed his pajamas and his stuffed rabbit and his book about trains and the toothbrush with the worn-down bristles that she kept meaning to replace. She drove him to Carla's. Carla took him from the porch and looked at Maren over his head and said, "You tell me what you find, when you can, when you are ready." Maren nodded. She kissed Eli's forehead. She told him she loved him more than the moon, which was the line she had used since he was 2, and he told her back, the moon and the stars and the dog, which was the addition he had made when he was 4 and had never stopped. She got back in the car. She drove north. The road was different the second time. The third time, technically, but the second time alone. She knew the curves now. She knew the place where the asphalt dipped and the car bottomed out if you did not slow down. She knew the long straight stretch where the trees on both sides made a kind of tunnel and the light went green and dim before it opened back out into pasture. She knew the gas station 2/3 of the way up where the price was 9 cents a gallon cheaper than anywhere closer to the city, and she stopped there and put in $5 because she had $11.46 in her purse, and she wanted to keep a $6 margin in case something went wrong on the way home. The clerk inside was a woman about her own age, with a tired face and a baby on her hip, and she rang up the gas without looking up, and Maren thought, that could be me on the other side of that counter, and it would be me, except for the key in my pocket, and even with the key, I do not yet know if it changes anything. She got back in the car. She kept driving. She reached Iris Tovey's mailbox at 11:45. She parked in the same place on the shoulder. She walked up the same dirt path. The chickens watched her from inside their wire run with the indifferent attention of animals who were not in a hurry to make up their minds. The orange cat was on the porch. Stepped this time, lying in a square of sun, and it raised its head to look at her without moving any other part of itself, and then it put its head back down. Iris opened the door before Maren knocked. She was wearing a barn coat over her dress, and her gray braid was pinned up at the back of her head, and she had a flashlight in one hand and a ring of keys in the other. She said, "You are early." Maren said, "I am sorry." Iris said, "Do not be sorry. Early is the only way I have ever trusted anyone. Come in. We will eat first. You cannot go into a cellar on no breakfast." The kitchen smelled like bacon and biscuits, and the coffee pot had clearly been on for some time. Iris set a plate in front of her without asking what she wanted, and Maren ate every bite, because she had eaten toast at 7 in the morning, and it was almost noon, and she had not had a proper meal in longer than she wanted to count. Iris ate across from her, slowly, the way old people eat, watching her in between bites with an expression that was not unkind, but was very thorough. After a while, Iris said, "Your grandfather wanted me to ask you one thing before we go down. I told him I would. He made me promise. I am asking now." Maren put her fork down. Iris said, "Do you owe anyone any money?" Maren felt the heat rise in her face. She made herself answer. She said, "Yes. I owe my landlord $740, and I have 8 days. I owe the daycare $400. I owe the credit card a number I have stopped looking at." Iris nodded once, the way a person nods when a thing they expected has been confirmed. She said, "Your grandfather thought you might. He wanted me to tell you this. He said, whatever she finds down there, she will be tempted to sell the first piece for the first price someone offers her, because she has been hungry too long and her shoulders are tired. Tell her not to. Tell her to call you. Tell her to wait." Tell her the difference between the first offer and the right offer is the difference between paying her rent for a month and never paying rent again. Maren did not speak. She put her hand over her eyes because she did not want Iris to see her face. Iris did not say anything for a long minute. Then she said, "Your grandfather knew you. He knew you without seeing you. That is the thing your mother could never understand about him. He loved at a distance with both eyes open. Most people cannot do that. He could." They finished the meal. Iris put the dishes in the sink without washing them. She said, "I do that later." She handed Maren the flashlight. She picked up a second flashlight for herself and a coil of soft cotton cord and a small folded canvas tarp. And she said, "The cord and the tarp are for if we need to bring anything out, which we will not today, because today is the looking day, not the moving day." Maren followed her out the door. They walked, because the inn was not far through the trees, and Iris said it was easier to walk than to take two vehicles. The path Iris took was not a path Maren had seen from the road. It cut through a stretch of mixed oak and hickory and came up on the back of the inn, on the kitchen side, where the herb garden Maren had not noticed the first day was still half alive. The rosemary woody but green, the sage spread wide, the mint gone to weed but unmistakable. Iris said, "I keep this side because he asked me to. The front side, the porch side, I keep enough so the building does not fall apart, but the back is what he wanted alive." He said the back was for the family, when the family came back. Maren did not ask which family. She thought she understood. They went in through the kitchen door. Iris had her own key. She did not use the brass key. She used a longer iron one, heavier, more ornate, and she said, "The brass key opens the front and the cellar. This iron one opens the kitchen and the side rooms and the rooms upstairs." He gave me this one in 1981, and he never asked for it back. The kitchen was exactly as Maren had left it. The calendar was still pinned to the wall. The circle was still red around the date. The 4 words were still there. "She comes. Stay quiet." Iris walked past it without looking. The way a person walks past a thing they have read so many times the words have stopped being words. She went to the cellar door. She slid the iron hook out of its eye. She opened the door. The bare bulb at the bottom of the stairs came on automatically, on a switch tied to the door itself, which Maren had not known the first time. Iris said, "He wired it that way so I would not have to fumble in the dark. He was practical that way." She started down. Maren followed. The stairs were wooden and steep, and they creaked in the way old wooden stairs creak, which is to say honestly, without complaint. The walls of the stairwell were stone, laid by hand a long time ago. The air got cooler as they descended, and drier, and the cedar smell from upstairs gave way to a different smell, a smell of stone and paper, and the faint dry mustiness of canvas that has been kept in a place with the right humidity for the right number of years. At the bottom of the stairs was a small landing, with a heavy wooden door set into the stone wall, and a second brass lock, and Iris said, "This is your key. You open this one." Maren took the brass key out of her pocket. Her hand was steady, which surprised her. She fit the key. She turned it. The lock opened. Iris reached past her and pulled the door inward, and the door was thicker than Maren had expected, the kind of thick that meant the door had been built to keep things in or to keep things at a particular temperature, and she stepped through after Iris into a room that was not what she had imagined. The room was large, larger than the cellar of a country and had any business being. It ran almost the full length of the building, low-ceilinged, with stone walls and a stone floor and a single high narrow window at the far end, set with iron bars and frosted glass, that let in a thin watery light from somewhere above ground level. There were shelves built into the walls, wooden shelves, deep, the kind a man builds when he is planning to keep things on them for a long time. There were 3 large trunks on the floor against the east wall. There were 2 wooden crates beside the trunks. There was a small wooden box, smaller than the others, set apart on a low table by itself, with a brass plate on its lid and a tag tied to the handle with a piece of brown twine. The room was clean. Not antiseptic clean, but the kind of clean that comes from a person sweeping it twice a year and dusting the shelves every spring. Iris said, "I come down once in March and once in October. I sweep. I check the trunks for damp. I have never opened them. He asked me not to, and I did not. I am telling you that so you know that what you see today is what he left, exactly, with nothing added and nothing taken away." Maren stood in the middle of the room and turned slowly in a circle. The shelves were not empty. The shelves held things she had not noticed at first because the light was low and her eyes had been on the trunks. The shelves held books. Old books. Leather-bound books with gold lettering on the spines that had faded but not vanished. Books with the kind of binding she had only seen in photographs of museum collections. She walked over to one shelf and lifted a book down very carefully. And the book was heavier than she expected, and the cover was tooled leather. And when she opened it, the pages inside were thick and slightly yellowed, and the printing was the kind of printing that does not get done anymore. In a language she could half read, the letter formed strange and elegant. She closed the book. She put it back exactly where it had been. She looked at Iris. Iris was watching her with an expression that was almost gentle. Iris said, "I do not know what any of them are worth. I know your grandfather looked at them, every one of them, in the 70s, and he told me once that the books alone were worth more than the entire inn had earned in its best decade. I do not know if that was true. I know he believed it." Maren walked to the trunks. She did not open them. She could not yet bring herself to open them. She crouched down beside the smallest of the three and put her hand on the lid, and the lid was wood with iron banding and a flat domed top, and the iron was old but not rusted, the way iron stays when it has been kept indoors in a dry stone room. The trunks were locked. Each one had a small brass lock, and Maren took the key out of her pocket and tried it in the first lock, and the key turned. Iris said, "He had every lock in this room cut to the same key. He said one key for the inheritance was simpler than 10 keys, and a single key was easier to hide if it ever needed hiding." Maren turned the key, but she did not lift the lid. Not yet. She moved to the Lyle box on the low table. The tag on the handle was old paper, the twine darkened by time, and the writing on the tag was in her grandfather's hand. 3 words. "Open this first." She looked at Iris. Iris nodded. She said, "That is the box he wanted you to start with. He said if you started with that one, the rest would make sense. If you started with the trunks, you would be overwhelmed. He thought of you as someone who could be overwhelmed, and he wanted to save you from it." Maren put her hand on the lid of the Lyle box. The box was the size of a large dictionary. The wood was a dark golden brown, the kind of wood that has been polished by hand over years, and the brass plate on the lid had 3 lines of engraving. The first line said L.H. Lyle. The second line said 1898. The third line said, "Do not part with." Maren did not yet know who L.H. Lyle was. She did not yet know what was inside. She did not yet know whether the contents of this room would pay her rent or change her life or do nothing at all, because the law would tangle her up before she could turn any of it into the money she needed. She did not know any of those things. She only knew that her hand was on the lid of a box that her grandfather had told her to open first, and that the woman beside her had been waiting 43 years for her to do it, and that whatever she found inside this box was the thread her grandfather had pulled out of the silence between them to hand to her, across the gap of a dozen years of forced estrangement and one quiet death in a lawyer's office on a Tuesday morning when she had walked in with $31 in her checking account and an eviction notice in her purse. She lifted her thumb to the latch. The latch was small and brass and clean. She pressed it. It clicked. The lid moved up under her hand. Inside the Lyle box, on a folded square of dark blue velvet, lay a single envelope, and beneath it, in a shallow tray fitted to the bottom of the box, 3 objects that Maren did not at first know how to look at. The envelope was addressed in her grandfather's hand. The address was one word. Maren. She lifted it out with both hands the way you lift a thing that you know in advance will be heavier than it appears. The envelope was sealed with the same dried blood wax as the one Whitfield had given her in his office, and she broke the seal with her thumbnail and unfolded the letter inside. The paper was good paper, the kind that does not yellow easily. The handwriting filled 3 pages and did not waver. The first line said, "My dear granddaughter, if you are reading this, I am dead, and you have done the harder part, which was getting through the door." She read the whole letter standing up in the cellar with the cool stone air around her, and Iris a few feet behind her saying nothing, and when she was done, she folded the letter back along its 3 creases and put it back in the envelope, and put the envelope in the inside pocket of her jacket, against her chest, where she could feel it. Then she lifted the velvet square out of the way and looked at the 3 objects in the tray. The first was a small pouch made of soft gray leather, cinched at the top with a silk drawstring. The second was a flat parcel about the size of her hand, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with white cotton string. The third was a single-bound book, smaller than the books on the shelves, the size of a journal, with a plain brown leather cover and no lettering on the spine. She did not open any of them yet. She turned to Iris. She said, "Did he tell you what was in here?" Iris said, "He told me the letter was for you, and the rest was for you to discover on your own time. He said he wanted you to know what one piece looked like before you saw all of it, because seeing all of it at once tends to make people stop seeing." Maren nodded slowly. She lifted the leather pouch first. She loosened the drawstring. She tipped the contents into her palm. 5 stones rolled out. They were small. None of them was larger than a pea. They were cut, faceted, and even under the weak light of the cellar bulb they threw small, sharp colors against her skin. She did not know how to tell, looking at them, whether they were glass or whether they were something else. She poured them carefully back into the pouch. She set the pouch on the velvet. She picked up the oilcloth parcel. The oilcloth came away in 2 motions. Inside the oilcloth was a sheet of waxed tissue, and inside the tissue was a single page, taken from a much larger book at some point in its long history, illuminated by hand, the borders threaded with gold leaf, and small painted figures of animals and saints and twining vines. The colors were so saturated they looked wet. She knew nothing about manuscripts, but she knew enough to know that this page was very old, and that the gold was real, because real gold does not look like paint. She rewrapped the page exactly as she had found it. Her hands had begun to shake again. Finally, the way her hands shook when she had not eaten enough, except she had eaten a full breakfast at Iris's table, and she knew the shaking was something else. She picked up the small brown leather book. She opened it to the first page. The first page was blank. The second page had 3 lines of writing in a hand that was not her grandfather's. The writing was older. The writing said, "The contents of this collection are the property of the family Lyle, sealed by my hand against the carelessness of my heirs, in the year of our Lord 1898, signed Leland Howard Lyle." She turned the page. The next page was a list. The list was 23 pages long. She did not read it then. She closed the book. She put everything back in the Lyle box in the order she had found it. She closed the lid. She put her hands flat on the lid, and she did not move for a long time. Iris stepped up beside her. Iris said, "I'm going to sit on the bench by the wall now, because my knees do not like the stone floor for long. You take whatever time you need. When you are ready to open the trunks, I will help you. When you are not ready, we will go back upstairs and have tea, and we will come back another day. There is no clock down here." Maren said, "Thank you." Iris walked to the wooden bench against the wall and sat down with the small, careful motion of a woman who had learned not to land on her knees if she could help it. And Maren stood at the table with her hands on the Lyle box, and she let herself, for the first time since the lawyer's office, feel the size of what was happening to her. It was not relief. Relief was too small a word. It was not joy. Joy was for people who had not yet learned that joy could be taken away from you by a phone call. What she felt was something colder and more useful. She felt the shape of a future that had not existed an hour ago, and she felt, underneath that, the much older shape of a man who had known her well enough across a dozen years of silence to leave her exactly this, and not a penny more or a penny less. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She walked to the first trunk. The first trunk took both of them to open, because the lid was heavy and the hinges had not been opened in years. Inside the first trunk, packed in layers of acid-free paper that someone had clearly replaced more recently than the trunk itself suggested, were books. More books of a kind. These were not the leather-bound classics on the shelves. These were thinner, smaller, some of them in plain cloth bindings, some in paper wrappers that looked like they had been printed in the 19th century and never opened. Maren lifted one out. It was a slim volume with a green cloth cover and a title stamped in faded gold on the spine. She did not recognize the title or the author. She set it down on the velvet square she had laid out as a working surface and lifted out another. And another. And after the 7th book, she stopped lifting them out and just looked into the trunk, which was layered all the way to the bottom. And she understood that she did not have the knowledge to know what any of these were worth, and that her grandfather had known this, and that this was precisely the reason for Iris's warning at the breakfast table. Her grandfather had not wanted her to look at one book and think it was worth $20 and sell it for $20 when it was worth $20,000. He had wanted her to wait. He had wanted her to call someone. He had wanted her to be slow in a life that had taught her to be fast. The second trunk held letters and documents. Bundles of them, tied with ribbons of different colors. The ribbons faded, but the bundles intact. Some of the letters were in envelopes addressed to people with names she had never heard of. Some were unfolded sheets, dried and brittle along their edges. One of the bundles was tied with black ribbon and labeled in a careful hand, in pencil on a small card slipped under the ribbon, with the words "War Correspondence, 1862 to 1865. Maren did not untie any of the bundles. She closed the trunk slowly. She moved to the third trunk. The third trunk was lined in dark velvet, and inside the velvet were partitioned compartments, and the compartments held things wrapped in tissue paper and small pieces of soft cloth. She lifted the corner of one wrapping. Under the tissue was a brooch, gold, set with a single dark green stone, the cut old, the gold heavy, the back stamped with a small hallmark she could not read. She replaced the tissue. She did not look at the rest. She closed the lid. She sat down on the floor beside the third trunk because her legs had decided to stop holding her up. Iris got off the bench and came over and sat down on the floor beside her, slowly, the way old women sit down on floors they have not sat on in a while. Iris put her hand on Maren's wrist. She did not say anything for a long time. Eventually she said, "When your grandfather brought all of this down here in 1973, he came back upstairs that first night, and he sat in the kitchen, and he poured himself a glass of whiskey, and he did not drink it. He sat there until morning. I came in to start breakfast, and he was still sitting there with the same glass in front of him, untouched, and he looked at me, and he said, 'Iris, I have either bought my family a future or I have bought us a curse, and I cannot tell yet which one.' I asked him what he meant. He said, 'The family who sold this to me did not know what they had. They thought it was their grandfather's old junk. They thought the books were beach reading and the letters were love notes and the jewelry was costume. They wanted it gone before the cousins arrived. I gave them what they asked for, which was the cancellation of a debt, and I gave them a small amount of cash besides, because I am not a thief, but I am not,' he said, 'an honest enough man to have told them what I think this is.' And he looked at me," Iris said, "and he said, 'The moment I tell anyone, the moment the wrong person knows, this stops belonging to me and starts belonging to lawyers, and then to the cousins, and then to anyone who can put together a story about whose grandfather it really was. So I will keep it. I will keep it quiet. And one day, when there is someone in the family I trust to do the right thing with it, I will pass it on.'" Iris squeezed Maren's wrist. She said, "He kept it for 51 years. He died without telling a single person other than me and his lawyer that this room existed. Your mother does not know. Your aunts do not know. The Lyle family, whatever is left of them, does not know. Until this morning, the only living people who knew what was in this cellar were me and Mr. Whitfield, and he only knew that there was a cellar. He did not know what was in it. Now there are 3 of us." Maren said, "Thank you." Iris said, "Do not thank me. Thank him, somewhere in your head, and then start being careful. Because the moment you start moving any of this, the moment you take a single piece to an appraiser, the moment you have a single conversation with the wrong person, the world will start to find out that this cellar exists, and your mother will be one of the first people in line. He told me to tell you that. He said your mother has a way of hearing things. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one." Maren sat on the cold stone floor for a long time, with Iris's hand still on her wrist, and she made herself think clearly, because clarity was the only thing she had ever brought into a hard room and had it be useful. She thought about who in her life she could trust to help her appraise even one of these objects without telling anyone. She thought about the $740 she owed in rent and the 8 days she had, and the small pouch of stones in the Lyle box that might pay her rent for a year if she sold them carelessly, and might pay her rent for 10 years if she sold them carefully, and might pay her rent for a lifetime if she did not sell them at all and instead used them as the basis of something larger. She thought about her son. She thought about the dream she had had the night before, her grandfather in the green wool coat, his hand outstretched. She thought about her mother, who had not called in 14 months. Her mother, who had told her at the funeral of her own husband, 3 years ago, that grief was a luxury that working people could not afford. Her mother, who had a way of hearing things. She stood up. She helped Iris up. She said, "I want to do this right. Iris said, then you have to be slow, and you have to be quiet, and you have to find one person you can trust who knows about at least one of these categories. You do not have to find a person who knows about everything. You have to find a person who knows about one thing, and who has a friend who knows about another, and who will not say your name to anyone outside of their own quiet circle. That is how things like this get appraised. That is how your grandfather expected you to do it. Maren said, do you know anyone? Iris was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I know one person. He is in his 80s. He lives 2 hours from here, in the other direction. He used to work at a museum in his younger days, and he keeps a small private practice now, for collectors who do not want their names in any catalogs. Your grandfather met him in 1976. They were not close. They knew each other well enough that your grandfather trusted him with 1 or 2 questions, and well enough that he never asked your grandfather a second question after the first one. His name is Theodore Hask. I have a phone number for him. I have not called it in 20 years. I cannot promise you he is still alive. But if he is alive, he will know what to do with what we have here. Maren said, can we call him? Iris said, we can try. But not from this house. Not from my house. From a pay phone. Today. They closed the cellar carefully. Iris locked the heavy wooden door with the brass key and handed the key back to Maren without comment. And Maren put the key back in her pocket against her thigh, where she could feel its small ridges through the cloth. They went up the wooden stairs and Iris slid the iron hook back into its eye, and they walked through the kitchen past the calendar with the red circle and out the back door into the herb garden, where the rosemary was warming in the afternoon sun and smelling like the inside of an old church. They walked back to Iris's house along the path through the trees. Neither of them spoke. When they reached Iris's kitchen, Iris went to a drawer beside the sink and pulled out a small leather address book, the kind with an alphabetical tab on the side, and she flipped to the H section and ran her finger down a column of names. She found one. She copied the number onto a scrap of paper. She handed the paper to Maren. She said, the nearest payphone I know of is at the gas station near the four-way stop. You passed it on the way up. You can call from there. Tell him your name. Tell him you are calling on the recommendation of Maren Holloway, who has recently died. Do not say anything else over the phone. If he wants to meet, agree to meet. If he does not, come back here and we will think of something else. Maren drove the 6 miles to the gas station. She parked beside the pay phone, which was bolted to the wall outside the building and had a small dome of yellowed plastic over it that did almost nothing to keep the wind off. She fed the phone 2 quarters. She dialed the number. The phone rang 4 times. A man answered. His voice was thin and old and clear. He said, hello? Maren said, my name is Maren Holloway. I am calling on the recommendation of Maren Holloway, who has recently died. There was a long silence on the other end. So long that she thought the connection had dropped. Then the man, Theodore Hask, said, I am sorry to hear that. He was a careful man. Where are you? Maren told him the name of the county. He said, are you near a place called Cedar Junction? She said, I do not know. He said, ask the clerk in the gas station you are calling from. He will know. There is a diner there. It is called the Plover. I can meet you there at 4 tomorrow afternoon. Bring whatever you would like me to see. Bring nothing if you prefer. Tell no one you are meeting me. I will know you when you walk in because you will look like Hollis around the eyes. Then he hung up. Maren stood with the receiver in her hand for another 10 seconds before she returned it to the cradle. She went inside the gas station. She asked the clerk where Cedar Junction was. The clerk drew her a small map on the back of a receipt. The diner was 40 minutes north. The directions were simple. She thanked him. She got back in the car. She drove to Iris's house. She told Iris what had been said. Iris nodded once, as if a thing she had been carrying for 43 years had shifted a small distance toward an ending. She drove home that evening with the Lyle box on the passenger seat beside her, wrapped in the canvas tarp Iris had brought, the seatbelt fastened across it as if it were a child. She had decided, with Iris, that she would not bring the trunks or the crates out of the cellar yet. She would bring only the Lyle box, only the smallest of the 3 inheritances, because she needed to bring something to Theodore Hask, and she did not yet trust herself to choose larger. She drove 3 hours back to the city with the Lyle box beside her and the brass key in her pocket and the letter from her grandfather against her chest inside her jacket. And she did not turn on the radio, because the silence inside the car was the same silence that had been inside the cellar, and she did not want to break it yet. When she pulled into the parking lot of her apartment building, She sat in the car for a long minute looking up at her window on the third floor, dark, with the eviction notice still folded in her purse, and the rent still unpaid, and the calendar still ticking off the days. She did not feel rescued. She felt, instead, like a person who had been told there was a door, and who had walked to the door, and who had opened the door, and who now had to walk through, knowing that walking through would be harder than anything before it. She brought the Lyle box upstairs wrapped in the canvas. She set it in the back of her closet, behind a stack of winter blankets she had not put away from the year before. She locked her apartment door. She went to Carla's and picked up Eli, who was already asleep in Carla's spare room, and Carla helped her carry him to the car, and Carla looked at her face and said, "You found something." Maren nodded. Carla said, "Are you safe?" Maren said, "I think I am about to need help in a way I have never asked for it before." Carla said, "You tell me when. I will be there." Maren drove Eli home and carried him upstairs and put him to bed and sat on the floor of his bedroom for a long time, because the floor of his bedroom was the place where, 3 years ago, she had finally cried after her husband's funeral, and the floor of his bedroom was where she went when she did not know what to do next. She did not cry tonight. She did, however, take the letter from her grandfather out of her jacket and read it again, in the small light of the lamp on the dresser, slowly, all 3 pages. The letter was not what she had expected. She had expected a sentimental letter, the kind a grandfather writes when he is dying and has run out of time to say the things he should have said. The letter was not sentimental. The letter was practical. It said, "You will find 3 trunks, 2 crates, a box, and a wall of books. The most valuable single objects are not the most expensive objects. The most expensive objects are not the most important objects. The most important object in that room is the brown leather inventory book, because the inventory book is the proof that the collection has been together for 125 years and was assembled by a single mind, which is what makes it valuable as a collection and not as a heap. Do not break up the collection unless you have to. If you have to, break it up slowly." The pouch in the box contains 5 rough-cut stones from a small operation the Lyle family ran in the 1880s. They are worth, at the time of my writing this, somewhere between $40,000 and $80,000 apiece, and you may sell 1 or 2 of them if you need to without affecting the value of anything else. The illuminated page is from a book that no longer exists, which is unusual, and I will not tell you what to do with it, because I do not myself know. The books on the shelves are worth, in my best estimate, about $3 million. The contents of the trunks are worth more. The contents of the crates I have never fully appraised. The whole, kept together and offered to the right institution at the right time, could be worth a number that I will not write down because writing it down has a way of making people foolish. Then the letter said, "Your mother will know within a month that something has happened. Plan for that. Do not tell her, but plan for that. Do not lie to her, but do not tell her until you have the legal title in your hand and the appraisals notarized and the collection in storage that you control." Finally, the letter said, "You were the smartest child in our family, Maren. You were 9 years old when I decided that, and I never changed my mind. Use this well. Use it for the boy, when he comes, because there will be a boy. Use it so you do not have to ask anyone for anything, ever again. And remember that everything in that room came to me because a family stopped paying attention to what they had. Pay attention." She read the letter twice. She folded it. She put it under her pillow, which was something she had not done with a piece of paper since she was 11. She lay down on top of her covers and stared at the ceiling for a long time. At some point she slept. When she woke, the sky outside was the gray of early morning, and Eli was standing beside her bed in his pajamas with his stuffed rabbit under one arm, and he was watching her face with the careful patience of a child who had learned to read his mother before he learned to read books. And he said, "Mama, you are smiling. Why are you smiling?" She had not realized she was smiling. She put her hand on his cheek. She said, "Because something good has happened, and I have not figured out how to tell you about it yet, but I will." He nodded the way he nodded about everything, accepting and unbothered. He climbed up on the bed beside her. He said, "Can we have pancakes?" She did not have pancake mix. She did not have milk. She had 4 eggs and half a stick of butter and a 1/4 cup of flour. She got up. She made pancakes from the 4 eggs and the flour and the butter and a pinch of sugar and a pinch of salt and a 1/4 teaspoon of vanilla from the bottle that was almost empty, and the pancakes were thin and golden and the best pancakes she had made in years, and Eli ate 4 of them, and she ate 3 of them, and they sat at the small kitchen table together, and she watched him eat, and she thought, this is the last week of pancakes made out of nothing. This is the last week of counting eggs. Whatever else happens, whatever the appraisals say, whatever my mother does, the last week of counting eggs is happening right now, and I am going to remember it. She drove to Cedar Junction that afternoon with Eli in the back seat, because Carla had work, and because she did not yet feel safe leaving Eli with anyone else, and because she had decided that if Theodore Hask did not want to meet her with her 6-year-old son present, then Theodore Hask was not the man Iris and her grandfather had remembered him to be. She put the Lyle box in the trunk wrapped in the canvas. She drove the 3 hours north. She found the diner. It was a small, low building with a tin roof and a hand-painted sign, and there were 4 pickup trucks in the gravel lot and 1 older sedan parked at the far end under a sycamore tree. She parked. She held Eli's hand. She walked inside. The diner was warm and smelled like coffee and bacon grease and the particular cleanness of a place that someone scrubbed twice a day. At the back corner booth, by the window, sat a thin old man in a gray cardigan and round wire-rimmed glasses, with a cup of tea in front of him and a folded newspaper beside the cup. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he raised his hand, one finger lifted in a small, careful wave, and Maren walked over with Eli's hand in hers, and she sat down in the booth opposite him. And Theodore Hask said, "You do look like him." Around the eyes. He would have liked that. He would not have admitted it, but he would have liked it. She did not bring the Lyle box into the diner. She had left it in the locked trunk of the car, because the diner was a public place and her grandfather's letter had been very specific about being careful. Theodore Hask did not ask her about it. He asked her, instead, about Eli. He asked Eli his name, and his age, and what his favorite animal was, and Eli told him, very seriously, that his favorite animal was a sea otter, because sea otters held hands when they slept so they did not drift apart. And Theodore Hask, who Maren would later learn had been widowed for 19 years, looked at the boy for a long moment and said, "That is the best answer to that question I have heard in my life." Then he ordered Eli a grilled cheese sandwich and a chocolate milk, and he ordered Maren a coffee and a piece of pie that she did not ask for, and he settled back into the booth and said, "Your grandfather called me 3 times in 50 years. Each time was the same way. He gave me a single object and asked me a single question. He never asked me a second question. He never let me see the rest of what he had. I always suspected there was a great deal more than what he was showing me. I never said so. He did not tip his hand to me, and I did not, in turn, tip my hand to him. We had what I would call a respectful arrangement. Now, since he has died, and since you are here, I would like to know what you have brought." Maren ate a bite of her pie before she answered. The pie was apple, and the crust was the kind of crust that took a person an hour to make properly, and she had not eaten pie like this in years. She said, "I have 1 box in the trunk of my car. The box contains a letter to me from my grandfather, a pouch of 5 stones, a single illuminated page from a manuscript, and a small inventory book. There is more, at the property, that I have not brought. There are 3 trunks and 2 crates and a wall of books, and I have not opened most of it. I came to you because Iris Tovey said you were the only person my grandfather had ever consulted, and because I do not know what I have, and I need to know enough to do the right thing." Theodore Hask listened without interrupting. When she was done, he set his cup of tea down on its saucer with a small quiet click. He said, "May I see the inventory book first?" He said, "The inventory book will tell us, between us, more than any single object will." Maren nodded. She finished her pie. She paid the bill from the $11 in her purse, and Hask did not stop her, which she appreciated, because she was tired of men assuming her bill was theirs. They walked outside. She unlocked the trunk. She lifted the canvas. She opened the Lyle box. She lifted out the brown leather book and handed it to him. He held the book the way a man holds an infant. He did not open it in the parking lot. He said, "We should not look at this here. There is a small office I keep in town. It is 15 minutes from this diner. Will you follow me?" He gave her an address. She wrote it down. He got into the sedan under the sycamore tree, the older car she had noticed when she pulled in, and he drove slowly out of the parking lot, and she followed. The office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building over a hardware store, up a narrow staircase, with a frosted glass door at the top that said only HESK in small black letters. He unlocked the door. The room inside was lined with bookshelves and lit by lamps with green glass shades, and there was a long wooden table in the center with a felt cloth on it. And there were small soft brushes and white cotton gloves laid out in a careful row, as if he had been expecting her, or expecting someone like her, for years. He pulled out a chair. He sat down. He put on a pair of cotton gloves. He laid the brown leather inventory book on the felt. He opened it. He read for a long time. Eli, who had come up the stairs with them, sat in the chair in the corner with the rest of his chocolate milk and a small picture book Hask had handed him without speaking, and Eli read his book and did not interrupt. After perhaps half an hour, Hask raised his head from the inventory and looked at Maren over the top of his glasses. His expression had not changed, but something behind his eyes had. He said, "Your grandfather understood what he had." He said, "Do you yet?" She said, "No." He said, "Then I will tell you what this book tells me. This book describes a collection assembled by a single man, Leland Howard Lyle, between 1865 and 1898. Lyle made his money in railroad supply during the war and spent the next 30 years buying things from estates that were breaking up across the South and the Midwest. He had a very particular eye. He bought books that turned out to be first editions of works now considered foundational. He bought letters from soldiers and writers who were unknown in their own time and have since become important. He bought, in 1882, a single-bound volume of correspondence that I will not name out loud in this room, because if it is what the inventory says it is the kind of document historians will fight over for a century. The inventory lists 147 items. I have read 43. If even half of what is described here is what it claims to be, your grandfather was sitting on a collection with very few peers in private hands in this country. Maren said, "What does that mean in numbers?" Hask was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your grandfather, in 1973, paid the Lyle family by canceling a debt that I happen to know was approximately $4,000. He gave them, on top of that, $200 in cash. $2,400 total. The current market value of what is described in this book, if it can be authenticated, is between $40 and $70 million. Maren did not speak. She did not move. She felt the chair under her, and the table, and the small weight of Eli's gaze from the corner where he had clearly been listening, because Eli always listened. She felt the letter from her grandfather against her chest, where she had put it back that morning. She said, 40 to 70. Hask said, "If the rest of the collection matches the quality of what is in this inventory. If the books on the shelves are what I suspect they are, the number is higher. I cannot give you a final number today, or this month, or this year. Authentication of a collection of this size takes time. It takes specialists who do not know each other and who will not, if you are careful, speak to each other." He looked at her over the rim of his glasses. He said, "Your grandfather told me once that he was keeping all of this for a grandchild. He said the grandchild did not yet exist, and he did not know what kind of person the grandchild would be, but he was going to keep it anyway. He was a strange and decent man. I am sorry he did not live to see you sitting in this chair." Maren did not trust herself to answer immediately. She looked at her hands, folded on the felt cloth, and she made them unfold and rest flat, palms down, fingers spread. After a long moment, she said, "What do I do?" Hask closed the inventory book. He set his cotton-gloved hand on top of it. He said, "The first thing you do is nothing. You do nothing for 2 weeks. You go home. You take care of your son. You do not tell anyone what I have just told you. You do not tell your sister-in-law. You do not tell your mother, especially not your mother. You do not tell Iris Tovey, because Iris already knows enough and does not need to know more. You go home. You wait. In 2 weeks you call me again. I will have made some quiet inquiries. I will have called 2 people, no more. Between us we will determine how to authenticate the first 10 items from your inventory without anyone outside our 4 heads knowing this collection exists." Maren nodded. She said, "I have one problem that will not wait 2 weeks." Hask raised an eyebrow. She said, "I owe $740 in rent on the 15th of this month, or I lose my apartment, and I have my son with me." Hask reached into the inside pocket of his cardigan and took out a small leather folder, and he wrote out a check, and he slid it across the felt cloth toward her. The check was for $2,000. He said, "This is not a loan, and it is not a gift. This is a small advance against a fee I will charge you for my services over the next year. Your grandfather and I had an arrangement of this kind in 1976. He never told you. I never told anyone else. You may take a day to think about it. Maren did not take a day. She picked up the check. She folded it. She put it in her purse. She said, "Thank you." He said, "Do not thank me. Pay the rent. Keep the apartment. Call me on the 18th. We will begin." She drove home that night with Eli asleep in the back seat and the check folded in her purse and the Lyle box wrapped in canvas in the trunk and the brass key still in her pocket against her thigh. And the world outside the car windows looked exactly the same as it had looked that morning. And she understood that this was the strangest thing about a life changing, that the world does not change with it. The world goes on being the same color and the same temperature and the same speed, while inside the small private space of a single car on a county road at night, a woman is being moved from one life into another, and no one outside the car knows it yet. She stopped at the gas station near her apartment and put $20 in the tank, more than she had put in at one time in 2 years, and she went inside and bought a gallon of milk and a box of cereal and a jar of peanut butter and a loaf of bread and a small package of cheap chocolate chip cookies that Eli had been pointing at in the store every time they went for the last 3 months. And she paid with a $20 bill, and she got change back, and she walked out of the gas station with 2 grocery bags in her hands and a sleeping child in the car and a check for $2,000 in her purse and the keys to $40 million worth of inheritance in her pocket. And she stood in the parking lot for a moment and let herself feel, just for that moment, the particular quiet shape of a turning point in a life that had not turned in a very long time. 3 days later, her mother called. Maren had been in the apartment, putting away the groceries she had bought with the leftover money after paying the landlord in cash that morning. The landlord had taken the $740 and had counted it twice, and had given her a hand-signed receipt, and had asked her, in the small, wary way of men who had given up on people surprising them, where she had gotten the money. She had told him she had gotten a small inheritance. He had nodded. He had said, "Congratulations." He had not said it warmly. He had said it the way a man says a thing he has heard before and has learned not to trust. She had walked back upstairs. She had been putting the box of cereal on the shelf when the phone rang, and the phone was the landline because her cell was still cut off. And when she picked it up, her mother's voice was on the other end, brisk and dry, and exactly the same voice she had been using for 40 years, and her mother said, "Hello, Maren. I hear you want to see Whitfield. I hear there was a will. I think it is time you and I had a conversation." Maren did not sit down. She had learned a long time ago that her mother's phone calls were not occasions for sitting down. She stood at the kitchen counter with the box of cereal still in her hand, and she said, "Hello, Mother." Her mother said, "You should have called me. I am the man's daughter. I am the next of kin. Whatever he left, the bulk of it comes to me by law, and I am willing to be reasonable about your share, but you should not have gone to that office without me." Maren said, "He asked me to come. He left me a small bequest. The lawyer notified me. I went." Her mother said, "What was the bequest?" Maren said, "He left me a few personal items. There is nothing of significant value." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Maren listened to that silence, and she knew her mother was deciding how to come at her next, because her mother had been deciding how to come at her next since Maren was 4 years old, and Maren had learned, somewhere around 11, to listen to the silences as carefully as she listened to the words. Her mother said, "You paid your rent this morning in cash. The landlord mentioned it to a friend of mine. The friend mentioned it to me. You have not had $700 in cash at one time in 3 years, Maren. I would like you to tell me what your grandfather left you. I am not asking out of greed. I am asking because he and I had arrangements he never honored, and I do not intend to be cheated by his ghost." Maren set the cereal down. She made her voice level. She said, "Mother, I am not going to discuss the contents of his estate over the phone. If you have questions about his will, you should call Whitfield directly. He is the executor." Her mother said, "Do not patronize me, Maren. I know how wills work. I called Whitfield 2 days ago, and he told me, in that polite voice he uses, that he was not authorized to discuss the matter." "Authorized by whom, Maren?" "Authorized by you. So you have given instructions, which means there is something worth giving instructions about." Maren did not answer. She had not, in fact, given Whitfield those instructions. Whitfield had given them to himself, on the basis of what her grandfather had told him to do, and that was a piece of information she did not intend to hand to her mother. She said, "Mother, I have to go. Eli is waking up. We can talk later." Her mother said, "Do not hang up on me, Maren. We have been over this. I am the next of kin. Whatever he left is mine by law, regardless of what he wrote down in some sentimental letter. If you have taken something out of that office that should be in the estate, you are committing a kind of theft I can prove with 2 phone calls. Do you understand me? Maren said, I am not stealing from anyone. The lawyer gave me what was directed to me. Her mother said, then you will not mind me coming down on Saturday to discuss it in person. I will be there at noon. Have the documents ready. Then she hung up. Maren stood at the kitchen counter for almost a minute with the dead receiver in her hand. Then she set it carefully back in the cradle, and she walked to the front door, and she checked the lock, which she had already checked twice that day, and she walked back to the kitchen and sat down at the small table and put her hands flat on the table and made herself breathe. Saturday was 3 days away. She had 2 weeks before she was supposed to call Theodore Hask. She had a Lyle box in the back of her closet behind a stack of winter blankets, and an inheritance worth between $40 and $70 million sitting in a stone-walled cellar 3 hours north, and a mother who was driving down on Saturday with a stated intention to take it from her, and she had no legal title to any of it, because her grandfather had not put the property in her name on paper, only in promises, only in a brass key and a hand-drawn map and a letter under her pillow. She called Carla. She told Carla, on the landline, only that her mother was coming on Saturday, and that she needed Carla's help, and that she needed Carla to come over that night. Carla came over within an hour. She brought a bag of takeout food, which she set on the table without comment, and she sat down across from Maren, and she said, tell me. Maren told her. She told her about the lawyer's office and the key and the inn and the cellar and Iris Tovey and Theodore Hask and the inventory book and the number, which she had not yet said out loud to anyone, and which she said now in a voice that was barely above a whisper, because saying that number out loud in her own kitchen felt like an act that could shake the windows. 40 to 70 million. Carla did not speak for a long time. She did not move. She did not change her expression. She was, Maren noticed for the first time, a person who had been trained by a job in a law office to absorb large pieces of information without showing any of it on her face, and Maren felt a wave of gratitude so sharp it almost hurt. After perhaps 2 minutes, Carla said, your mother cannot have any of it. Not a piece. Not a thread. Not because she is not entitled to grieve, but because she is the exact kind of person your grandfather built 51 years of silence to keep this away from. And if you let her in now, you will be undoing what he did, and you will be doing it on the last week he had left to give you anything. She said, we are going to do 3 things this week. We are going to find a lawyer who is not Whitfield, because Whitfield is too close to your grandfather, and we need someone with no history. We are going to get the property put into your name, by quitclaim, by whatever instrument your grandfather may have signed that we have not yet seen, and we are going to do it before Saturday. And we are going to be ready, when your mother sits down at this table on Saturday at noon, with exactly enough truth to make her go away and exactly little enough truth that she does not know what to come back for. Maren said, can we do all of that in 3 days? Carla said, we are going to try. They worked until 2 in the morning. Carla made phone calls from her cell phone, which she had paid the bill on, to a lawyer she knew from her firm who took private cases on the side, and who owed her a favor from a thing she had done quietly for him 3 years ago. The lawyer agreed to meet Maren the next morning at 7, before his regular workday started, at a coffee shop near his office. Carla made another call to a friend who worked at the county recorder's office in the county where the inn was. That call was vaguer and shorter because Carla was being careful, but she came off the phone with a small piece of information that mattered. The property was still recorded in Hollis Holloway's name. Nothing had been filed against it. No one had begun probate. They had a window. The window was small. They had perhaps 2 weeks before her mother, if her mother knew where to look, could file a probate petition that would tie up the property for months. Carla wrote all of this down on a yellow legal pad and slid the pad across the table to Maren and said, you are going to read this every morning when you wake up until Saturday, so that when she sits down across from you, you know exactly what you are protecting and exactly what you are willing to lose. Maren took the pad. She looked at it. She nodded. Carla stayed the night on the couch, because Maren did not want to be alone in the apartment with the Lyle box in the closet and her mother 3 days away. They slept lightly. In the morning, Maren made coffee and woke Eli and dressed him and dropped him at school, and then she drove to the coffee shop near the lawyer's office and she sat across from a man in his 50s with a careful suit and a thin briefcase. And she told him a version of the story that Carla had helped her shape the night before, a version that included the inn, the key, the cellar, the grandfather's letter, and the mother's phone call. But that did not yet include the inventory book or the number Theodore Hask had given her, because Carla had said, "Hold one card back. Always hold one card back. Your mother will smell the size of this if you say the whole size of it too soon." The lawyer listened. He took notes. When she was done, he said, "You have a difficult case, but not an impossible one. We can begin 3 things today. We can file a petition to open probate, which will start the clock and give us standing. We can record an affidavit of the grandfather's intent, based on the letter you have and the lawyer Whitfield's testimony, which we will need to secure quickly. And we can establish a chain of custody for any items that were specifically bequeathed to you, separate from the residual estate, which is where your mother will try to make her claim." He paused. He said, "The strongest piece of evidence you have is that letter. The second strongest is Iris Tovey. The third strongest is Whitfield himself. We need all 3 on the record this week." Maren said, "Can it be done?" He said, "It can. It will cost you." Maren said, "I have an arrangement that will cover it." The lawyer nodded. He did not ask what the arrangement was. He said, "Then we begin today." She did not know yet, sitting in that coffee shop with the morning light slanting through the window and a paper cup of coffee growing cold beside her hand, whether everything would hold together by Saturday at noon. She did not know whether her mother would arrive with a lawyer of her own, or alone, or whether her mother would arrive at all. She did not know whether Theodore Hask's quiet inquiries would protect the collection or whether some piece of news would slip, somewhere, and bring strangers down the gravel track to the inn before she was ready. She did not know whether the brass key in her pocket would be enough, in the end, against a mother who had spent 40 years learning how to take what she wanted from people who had less practice protecting themselves. What she did know, what she had begun to understand sometime during the long night around Carla's yellow pad, was that her grandfather had not left her a treasure. He had left her a test. The treasure was the prize for passing the test. And the test, the actual test, was whether she could become, in the small number of days she had, the kind of woman who could stand in her own kitchen on Saturday at noon, with a 6-year-old son in the next room and a brass key in her pocket and a letter under her pillow, and look across the table at the woman who had told her at 20 that she was nobody's burden but her own, and say, very quietly and very clearly, "No. He left this to me. You are not getting any of it." And then live with what came after. Saturday morning came slowly, the way mornings come slowly when you have been awake for parts of every hour of the night before them. Maren had risen at 5, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with the yellow pad Carla had left her, and read through every line of it twice. She had then put the pad in the drawer beside the silverware, because she did not want it visible on the counter when her mother walked in. She had cleaned the kitchen. She had cleaned the living room. She had taken the eviction notice out of her purse and burned it in the sink, because she did not need it anymore, because the rent was paid through the end of the next month and would be paid through the month after that, and there was no longer any reason for that piece of paper to exist in her life. The smoke had set off the smoke detector, and Eli had come into the kitchen in his pajamas to ask if there was a fire, and she had told him no, it was just an old paper she was getting rid of, and he had nodded and gone back to bed for another half hour. She had made him pancakes again, because she now had pancake mix in the cupboard, real pancake mix, in a yellow box, and she had used it, and they had tasted normal and unremarkable, and she had been glad about that, because there is a particular kind of luxury in food that does not require a small private celebration to eat. Carla arrived at 10. She had brought a folder of documents and a thermos of coffee, and the lawyer Carla had hired on Wednesday, a soft-spoken man named Asher Crane who had spent 2 days getting the property entered into probate under conditions that protected Maren's standing. He sat at the kitchen table in a clean dark suit, with his folder open in front of him, and he did not say more than he needed to say, which Maren had already decided she appreciated. Carla had asked her, the night before, whether she wanted the lawyer present when her mother arrived, and Maren had said no. She had said, "My mother needs to see me alone first. If she sees a lawyer at this table, she will assume the lawyer is the reason I am saying no. I need her to know it is me." Carla had nodded slowly. She had said, "Then Asher and I will be in the back bedroom. We will hear everything." We will come out if you ask us to. And if your mother begins to threaten you in a way I do not like, I will come out whether you ask or not." Maren had agreed. They had practiced, twice, what she would say and what she would not say, and what she would do if her mother brought a third person with her. Eli was at his friend's house for the day, a small mercy Carla had arranged with the friend's mother, who Carla had vouched for and who had asked no questions. The apartment was quieter without Eli in it than Maren remembered any apartment ever being. At 11:58, 2 minutes before noon, the buzzer rang from the front door downstairs. Maren walked to the intercom. She pressed the button. She said, "Mother." Her mother's voice, brisk through the speaker, said, "Maren, buzz me up." Maren buzzed her up. Carla and Asher walked into the back bedroom without speaking and closed the door behind them. Maren stood at the kitchen counter and listened to the footsteps coming up the stairs. There were 2 sets of footsteps. She had expected that. She had expected one more. She did not expect the third. Her mother knocked once. Maren opened the door. Her mother was wearing a dark wool coat that Maren had not seen before, and her hair was pulled back in a way that made her face look harder than usual, and she walked into the apartment without being invited, and behind her came a man Maren did not recognize, in a suit and a tie, with a leather portfolio under his arm, and behind him came a second woman, also in a wool coat, older than her mother, with a face that bore a strong family resemblance to her grandfather, and Maren understood, after a half-second of looking at her, that this was her grandfather's older sister, her great-aunt Lenore, who Maren had not seen in 23 years and had been told had moved to Florida and stopped speaking to the family long before. Maren's mother said, "Sit down, Maren. We have a great deal to discuss." Maren did not sit down. She closed the front door behind them. She stood with her back to it. She said, "Mother, I did not know you were bringing other people." Her mother said, "This is Mr. Becker. He is my attorney. This is your great-aunt Lenore. She has flown in from Tampa. She is a beneficiary of your grandfather's estate, regardless of what was put in writing, and she is here to make sure that my interests and her interests are protected against any irregular handling of the will." Maren looked at Lenore. Lenore did not meet her eyes. Lenore was looking at the framed photograph on the wall by the front door, the one of Eli at 4, taken on a swing in the park near her old apartment, and Maren saw that Lenore was uncomfortable, and she filed that away, because uncomfortable was a kind of leverage if a person was patient enough to use it. Maren said, "I am willing to talk to my mother. I am not willing to talk to lawyers I have not agreed to talk to, and I am not willing to talk to family members I have not seen since I was 9 years old, who have decided to appear on my doorstep without warning. Mr. Becker, you will need to wait downstairs. Aunt Lenore, I am happy to speak with you another day, if you would like to call me on the phone first. Today, this conversation is between my mother and me." Her mother said, "Maren, do not be ridiculous." Maren said, "Mother, I am not being ridiculous. I am being clear. You called me on Wednesday. You said you wanted a conversation. I have made time for that conversation. You did not say you were bringing 2 other people. You did not give me the chance to prepare. If you would like to have that conversation with me, here, now, the 2 of them can wait downstairs and I will pour you a cup of coffee. If you would not like to have that conversation under those terms, you can all leave, and you can call me later, and we will reschedule." Her mother stared at her. Maren had seen the stare before. The stare was the same stare her mother had given her at 16, when Maren had refused to break up with a boy her mother disapproved of, and the same stare she had given her at 22, when Maren had married Eli's father against her mother's wishes, and the same stare she had given her at her husband's funeral, when Maren had refused to let her mother speak at the service. It was a stare that had once, when Maren was younger, been enough to make her say what her mother wanted her to say. It was not enough anymore. Maren held it. She did not blink. She did not look away. After perhaps 10 seconds, which is a very long time when you are holding a stare with your own mother in your own apartment with a brass key in your pocket, her mother turned her face slightly to the side and said, "Fine. Mr. Becker, Lenore, you will wait downstairs. I will be down within the hour." Mr. Becker said, "Are you sure?" Her mother said, "I am sure." The 2 of them left. Maren closed the door behind them. She turned the deadbolt. She looked at her mother. She said, "Sit down. I will make coffee." She made the coffee slowly on purpose, with her back to her mother, because she needed the small space of those 3 minutes more than she needed to be quick. When she sat down across from her mother at the table, with 2 cups between them, She could feel Carla and Asher behind the bedroom door, listening. She could feel the brass key in her pocket against her thigh. She could feel the letter from her grandfather, which she had taken from under her pillow that morning and folded into the inside pocket of her cardigan against her ribs. She could feel, for the first time in her life, that the table she was sitting at was her table in her apartment, and that the woman across from her was a guest, and that the guest could be asked to leave at any time. She let those feelings settle for a moment. Then she said, "Talk to me." Her mother talked for almost 20 minutes. She talked about the years of her childhood with Hollis Holloway, which had been, by her account, a difficult childhood with a distant father who had favored work over his daughter. She talked about the falling out, which had been, by her account, a misunderstanding that her father had stubbornly refused to resolve. She talked about her certainty that he had left something of significant value, because he had always had money he did not spend on the family, and because the inn property, which she had assumed for years was worthless, was now apparently in good repair, according to a phone call she had made on Thursday to a neighbor up there who had told her that someone had been seen on the property earlier that week. Maren did not react to that piece of information. She added it to the list of things she would need to be more careful about. Her mother said, "I know there is something, Maren. I know you have been up there. I am not asking you to share it equally. I am asking you to be reasonable. I will accept half. I will accept a third. I will accept whatever you and Lenore decide is fair, as long as I am at the table. Do not cut me out, Maren. I am your mother." Maren listened to all of it without interrupting. When her mother stopped, she sat for a moment in silence. Then she said, "Mother, I am going to tell you what is true. I went to Mr. Whitfield's office on Tuesday. He gave me a small bequest, in keeping with what he was instructed to do by my grandfather. The bequest does not constitute the bulk of the estate. The bulk of the estate is going through probate, and Mr. Crane, who is my attorney, will be in touch with Mr. Becker, if Mr. Becker is your attorney of record, through proper channels. I am not going to negotiate the estate with you across this table. I am not going to be intimidated by the appearance of Aunt Lenore, whom my grandfather had not spoken to in over 30 years, and who you and I both know has no claim. I am not going to pretend that you and I have had the kind of relationship in the last decade that entitles you to walk into my home with a lawyer and a long-lost aunt and demand that I share an inheritance. I am willing to have a conversation with you about my grandfather, about your relationship with him, about the things that went wrong between you. I am willing to have that conversation across many afternoons over many months, if you would like to begin to have a different kind of relationship with me and with your grandson. But that conversation is not the conversation you came here to have today." Her mother said, "You ungrateful little." Maren held up her hand. Her mother stopped. Maren had not held up her hand to her mother before. She had not known, until she did it, that her hand would obey the instruction. She said, "Mother, you said in 1988 that I was the reason you and your father stopped speaking. You said in 2006 that I was the reason your second marriage ended. You said at my husband's funeral, in front of his sister, that I had ruined my life by marrying him and that his death was the price of that ruination. I am not going to listen to one more sentence of that today. If you want to sit at this table with me, you will sit here without saying that kind of thing. If you cannot, you will leave. I am not your daughter the way you have decided I am your daughter. I am, in fact, your daughter, but I am also the mother of a 6-year-old boy who deserves better than I had, and I am not going to model, for that boy, the kind of accepting silence I was taught to model. Do you understand me?" Her mother looked at her for a long time. The expression on her mother's face was a mixture of things Maren had never seen before, all at once, in the same instant. There was anger in it. There was disbelief. There was, underneath everything, a thin, sharp current of something Maren had not expected to see, which was grief, real grief, the grief of a woman who had spent 40 years building a particular shape of relationship with her daughter and who had just been told, plainly, that the shape was over. Maren felt, looking at her mother's face, a small, unexpected wave of sorrow that she had not braced for. She had braced for her own anger. She had braced for fear. She had not braced for the recognition that her mother, in her own way, in her own broken way, was losing something today that her mother had counted on. She did not soften. She did not take any of it back. But she felt it, and she filed that feeling away, because feeling it was part of being the person her grandfather had hoped she would be. Her mother stood up. She did not finish her coffee. She picked up her purse from the chair beside her. She walked to the door. She put her hand on the knob. She turned back. She said, "You are going to regret this conversation, Maren." Maren said, "Mother, I have been regretting our conversations for 30 years. This is the first one I do not think I will regret." Her mother opened the door. She walked out. She closed the door behind her. Maren listened to her footsteps go down the stairs. She listened to the front door of the building open and close. She listened to a car start in the parking lot and pull away. She sat at the table without moving for almost 5 full minutes. Then the bedroom door opened and Carla came out, and Carla walked over to the table without a word, and Carla sat down in the chair her mother had just vacated, and Carla put her hand on Maren's wrist, the way Tovey had put her hand on her wrist in the cellar, and Carla said, "You did it." Maren put her face in her hands. She let herself, for the first time in years, cry without checking who could see her. Asher Crane came out of the bedroom a few minutes later, after Carla had handed Maren a tissue and made her a fresh cup of coffee, and he sat down at the table, and he said, "You were extraordinary." He said, "Your mother's attorney is not going to find any traction here. She has no evidence of a will favoring her, because there is no such will. She has Lenore, but Lenore has no standing under the laws of this state, and Lenore knows it, which is why Lenore stayed in the car and let your mother go up alone. The probate filing we made on Wednesday is solid. The affidavit Mr. Whitfield signed yesterday is solid. The letter from your grandfather, which I have seen, is solid. We are in a strong position." Maren said, "What happens now?" Asher said, "Your mother may file a contest. She has the right to. If she does, we will respond. We have the documents we need. We have the witnesses we need. We have a clean chain of custody for everything you have received." He paused. He said, "I do not believe she will file. She is angry. She came here today expecting a different conversation. She did not get it. She will think about it for a week. She will make some phone calls. She will be told, by several people, that she does not have a case. She will be angrier. And then, in my experience, she will go quiet, because women like your mother do not like to lose in public, and a contest she cannot win is a loss she will not want filed in the county records." Maren nodded. She felt very tired. Carla saw it, and Carla stood up, and Carla said, "We are going to go now. You are going to take a nap. You are going to pick Eli up at 5. You are going to eat dinner. You are going to call me tomorrow. We will talk about the next thing." Asher left her his card. He left her the folder of documents. They both went home. She slept for 2 hours on the couch, hard, the way you sleep when your body has been holding a thing for days and is finally allowed to let it go. When she woke, the light in the apartment had shifted, and the brass key was still in her pocket, and her mother had not come back, and Maren walked to the kitchen and poured the rest of the coffee down the sink because it had gone cold, and she made a fresh pot for no reason other than that she could afford to. She picked Eli up at 5. He told her about his day at his friend's house, about a game they had invented that involved hiding small plastic animals in the couch cushions, and she listened to him with her whole attention, because she had spent the morning being someone she had needed to be for 30 years and had only just learned how to be, and listening to her son was the simplest way she knew of being someone else again. The following weekend, she did something she had not yet done. She took Eli to the inn. She had been waiting for the right moment, and she had decided, in the days after the confrontation, that the right moment was not going to announce itself, and that she would have to choose it. She told Eli they were going on a trip. He asked where. She said, "To see a house your great-grandfather built." He nodded the way he nodded about most things. They drove the 3 hours north, and Eli watched the trees out the window and asked her, about an hour in, whether the great-grandfather was the same one she had cried about a few weeks ago, and Maren said yes. And Eli said, "Was he a nice man?" And Maren said, "He was a quiet man, and he was a careful man, and I think he would have been very glad to meet you." Eli said, "Can he meet me now?" Maren said, "No, baby. He died before you, and I knew each other again." Eli thought about that for a moment. Then he said, "But we are going to see his house." Maren said, "Yes, we are going to see his house." They drove through the first iron gate, and Eli's eyes went wide because the gate was old and rusted in the way that gates in storybooks were old and rusted, and they drove the gravel track, and the inn came into view around the curve of the low hill, and Eli sat up in his car seat and said, "Mama, is that a castle?" She said, "It is not a castle. It is an inn." Eli said, "What is an inn?" She said, "It is a house where strangers used to stay when they were traveling, a long time ago, before there were hotels everywhere. Eli said, "Did people stay here?" Maren said, "They used to. Not anymore. Iris is taking care of it now." Iris was on the porch when they pulled up, in her barn coat, her gray braid pinned at the back of her head, and she walked down the steps slowly, and she crouched down to Eli's height when Maren helped him out of the car, and she said, "You must be the boy." Eli said, "I am Eli." Iris said, "I am Iris. I knew your great-grandfather. I knew him for 43 years. Eli looked at her with the careful attention he gave to people who said important things. He said, "Was he tall?" Iris laughed, which Maren had not heard her do before. Iris said, "He was tall enough. He was taller than your mother. He was shorter than the door frame. He had your mother's eyes. He would have liked your shoes." They went inside. Maren walked Eli through the rooms slowly. She showed him the entry hall, and the parlor with the sheeted furniture, and the dining room with the long table. She showed him the kitchen and the green enamel stove and the calendar on the wall, which she had not yet taken down, because she had not yet been ready. She did not show him the cellar. She had decided that the cellar would wait. She would show him the cellar when he was older. She would explain everything to him when he was old enough to hold the explanation. Today she wanted him to see the house. She wanted him to walk on the porch. She wanted him to put his hand on the green enamel stove and feel the cool iron under his palm and know that someone before him had stood at this stove and made coffee in the morning. She lifted him up to the stove. She put his hand on the burner cover. She said, "Your great-grandfather used to stand right here. He would heat water in a pot every morning. He would drink coffee. He would look out that window." Eli looked at the window. He looked at the stove. He said, "Mama, did he know I would come here someday?" Maren did not answer right away. She set him down on his feet. She crouched down to his level. She said, "Baby, I think he hoped. I do not know if he knew, but he hoped." And then she said, "And so did I. I hoped too. And here we are." They stayed at the inn for the weekend. Iris made them dinner in the kitchen, simple food, biscuits and stew and apple pie, and Eli ate 2 helpings of everything and asked Iris questions about the chickens at her own house and the orange cat on the porch, and Iris answered him with the patience of a woman who had been waiting for 43 years to have a small boy at her table asking questions about chickens. They slept upstairs, in 2 of the old guest rooms, with quilts that smelled like cedar from the chest at the foot of each bed. Maren lay in her bed for a long time before she fell asleep, listening to the small night sounds of the inn, which were not the sounds she had grown up around, but which were starting, slowly, to feel like the sounds she had been missing without knowing she had been missing them. In the morning, Eli woke her by climbing into her bed and asking if there were chickens here too, and she said no, not at this house, only at Iris's house, and they would visit them after breakfast. They did. Eli held a chicken, briefly, before it squirmed away. He laughed for almost a full minute. Maren stood at the fence and watched him and felt something inside her chest that had been knotted for a very long time begin, finally, to come loose. The 2 weeks Theodore Hask had asked her to wait passed slowly. She did not go back to the inn after that first weekend with Eli. She did not call Iris. She did not call Hask. She paid the daycare $400 in cash on Monday, and the daycare director, who had been letting Maren slide for 2 months on a payment plan that Maren had not actually been keeping, took the cash with an expression that was either approval or confusion or both, and Eli's enrollment was current again for the first time since August. She paid the small balance on her electric bill. She paid the cell phone reconnection fee and was able to use her phone again, which felt strange, like getting back a sense she had not realized she had been doing without. She bought Eli a new pair of shoes, because his old ones had a hole through the sole that she had been patching with duct tape, and she bought him 2 new books at the secondhand store, both about trains, and he carried them around the apartment for 3 days as if they were medals. She did not buy anything for herself, because she did not yet trust the idea that she was allowed to. On the 18th, she called Theodore Hask. He answered on the second ring. He said, "You are punctual." He said, "I have spoken to my 2 people. They have agreed to take on the work, on terms I will explain to you when we meet next, and they have agreed to the conditions of confidentiality I required. We are ready to begin authentication on the first 10 items. I would like you to bring me the inventory book, the leather pouch, and the illuminated page. We will start there, because the inventory tells us the provenance. The stones are easy to evaluate, and the page is the kind of object that, if authenticated, opens doors. I will keep all 3 items in my office safe between our sessions, With insurance I have arranged on your behalf. The arrangement will cost you nothing additional. Are you available next Tuesday? Maren said, I am. Hask said, drive carefully. Bring your son if you cannot find a sitter. He has good manners. She drove to Cedar Junction on Tuesday with Eli in the back seat and the Lyle box in the trunk, and Hask had laid out a small table in his office with a pad of paper and a magnifying loupe and a soft white cloth, and he and Maren spent 4 hours going through the inventory together, page by page, with Hask reading each entry aloud and explaining what it would take to authenticate that particular item, and Maren writing down, in her own careful hand, what Hask said. By the end of the afternoon they had a plan. The plan involved bringing items to his office in batches of 3, beginning with the stones and the illuminated page, then moving to the inventory book itself, then to a selection of letters from the second trunk, then to a selection of books from the wall. The plan would take, at Hask's estimate, between 14 and 18 months to complete. At the end of it, they would have certified appraisals on perhaps 30 to 40% of the collection, which would be enough, Hask said, to establish the value of the whole and to give Maren options. The options, Hask said, were as follows. The first option was to sell the collection at auction, piece by piece, over several years. This would produce the highest gross return, but would also expose her to the most attention and would generate tax obligations of a kind that she would need to plan for in advance. The second option was to sell the collection as a whole, in a private sale, to a single buyer, most likely an institution or a private foundation. This would produce a smaller gross return, but would settle the matter quickly and quietly. The third option was to donate the collection, or significant parts of it, to a museum or library, in exchange for a tax deduction and the establishment of a named collection that would bear her grandfather's name in perpetuity. The fourth option was some combination of the 3. Hask said, your grandfather would have preferred the third option. He told me so, once, in 1998, the second time he called me. He said, if the collection ever comes to my granddaughter, tell her to think hard about giving it away. Tell her she does not need all of it. Tell her a person can change her life with a third of it, and the other 2/3 can change a great many other lives. I am repeating that to you because he asked me to. I am not telling you to make any particular decision. The decision is yours. Maren did not decide that day. She did not decide the next week or the next month. She brought items to Hask's office every 2 weeks, beginning with the pouch of stones, which were authenticated within a month and which Hask sold, with her permission, 2 of them, through a private buyer he knew, for $46,000 apiece, less his commission and the buyer's commission. The check from those 2 sales, after everything was paid, cleared into the bank account Asher Crane had helped her set up at a small credit union in early December. The amount in the account, after that deposit, was the largest amount of money Maren had ever seen in her name. She sat in the parking lot of the credit union after she got the deposit confirmation, and she stared at the printed slip in her hand for a long time, and she did not feel rich. She felt, instead, a particular kind of vertigo, the vertigo of a person who has been climbing for so long that flat ground feels strange under her feet. She drove home. She did not tell anyone except Carla and Asher about the amount. She made a list, on the same yellow pad Carla had left her, of the things she would do with that money, in order. The list was short. Pay off the credit card. Pay off the small loan she had taken from a coworker 2 years ago and had been paying back at $10 a month. Replace the timing belt on the car, which she had been told 8 months ago needed replacing and which she had been ignoring. Put $20,000 into a savings account she did not touch. Use the rest for the next phase of the work with Hask, which was going to involve travel and storage and small fees she could not yet enumerate. She did all of those things over the course of December and January. She did not move. She did not buy a house. She did not buy a new car. She kept the apartment because the apartment was paid up through the spring and because Eli was settled and because she had learned, over too many years of having nothing, that the worst thing a person could do with sudden money was to spend it as if the money were going to keep coming. She did, in February, take Eli to the ocean for the first time. They drove 4 hours to the coast. They stayed 2 nights in a small clean motel that cost $40 a night, because Maren did not yet feel ready for anything more, and Eli stood on the beach in his coat and his new shoes and looked at the water for an entire hour without moving. And then he turned to her and said, "Mama, is the water always here?" And she had said, "Yes, baby. The water is always here." And he had nodded and gone back to looking at it. And she had stood on the sand behind him with her hands in her pockets, and the brass key in her left pocket and Theodore Hask's first authentication report in the right one. And she had cried quietly, where Eli could not see her, because crying quietly on a beach in February with your son finally getting to see the ocean is a different kind of crying than she had done at any other point in her life, and she did not yet have a word for what it was. The authentication of the collection continued through the spring. The illuminated page was confirmed by Hask's Charleston associate as the work of a particular 15th-century atelier, and the page was estimated at a value that Maren wrote down in her notebook and did not say out loud. The inventory book itself, Leland Howard Lyle's own handwriting, became its own kind of artifact, and Hask told her that several institutions would compete for the right to house it as a research document independent of the collection. The contents of the first trunk, the books, were cataloged over a period of 4 months by a graduate student Hask trusted, a young woman in her late 20s who came up to the inn 3 days a week and worked alone in the cellar with white gloves and a notebook and a small lamp Iris brought down for her. Maren met her once, briefly. The young woman was serious and quiet, and seemed to understand that her work was confidential without having to be told. Hask paid her out of the advance arrangement, and Maren did not ask the amount. The second trunk, the letters, took longer, because Hask's Boston specialist worked slowly and worked alone, and because some of the letters required cross-reference with collections at other institutions that had to be approached carefully so as not to reveal the existence of the larger archive. The third trunk, the jewelry and small objects, was appraised in batches by a third specialist, a woman in Atlanta whose name Maren never learned and whose reports came back through Hask. By the following autumn, almost a year after the brass key had first been laid in Maren's palm in Whitfield's office, Maren had a binder on her kitchen table that contained certified appraisals of approximately 46 items from the collection, with a total appraised value of just over $14 million. The full collection was estimated, by Hask, at somewhere between 55 and 72 million, with the lower end being a conservative figure that assumed several items would not authenticate well, and the upper end being what he believed they would in fact reach if the work was completed with patience. Maren did not sell any more of the collection that year, beyond the 2 stones in December. She did not need to. She had enough to live on. She had enough to start small. She had enough to begin to build the kind of life her grandfather had described in the 3rd page of his letter, the kind of life in which she did not have to ask anyone for anything. She paid for Eli's school. She paid for a tutor for him in the spring, because his teacher had mentioned that he was ahead of the class in reading and would benefit from more challenging material. She paid Carla, over Carla's loud objections, for the 3 years of babysitting Carla had done for nothing during the years when Maren had been unable to pay. The check Maren wrote to Carla was for $15,000, and Carla had cried at the kitchen table when Maren put it in her hand, and Carla had said, "I did not do it for money," and Maren had said, "I know. That is why you get it." She made a second decision in the spring of that second year. She decided to keep the inn. She had thought, in the early months, that she would sell the inn, because the inn was 3 hours away and she had no plans to run a country inn, and she had no interest in managing a property she could not visit. But Iris Tovey had been keeping the inn for 43 years, and Iris was now 72, and Iris had no family of her own, and Iris had been paid by Maren's grandfather, every quarter, in cash, for so long that the arrangement was the closest thing Iris had to a pension. Maren did not want to take that away from Iris. She drove up to the inn one weekend in April, and she sat at Iris's kitchen table with the orange cat in her lap, and she said, "I am going to keep the inn, and I am going to put you on a proper salary, with proper benefits, and I am going to fix the roof and the porch and the upstairs windows, and you are going to keep doing what you have been doing, and at the end of every quarter you will get a check, not in cash, in a real bank account, with your name on it, and you will have insurance, and you will have everything you should have had 30 years ago." Iris looked at her across the table for a long moment, and Iris said, "You do not have to do this." Maren said, "I know I do not have to. I am doing it anyway, because my grandfather would have done it if he had thought of it in time, and because I am the one who gets to think of it now." Iris nodded once, very slowly, and Iris's eyes filled briefly with tears that she did not let fall, because Iris was not the kind of woman who let tears fall, and Iris said, "Your grandfather would have liked the way you handled this." And Maren said, "I know. I think about it every day." The inn was repaired over the summer. Maren hired local contractors, men Iris recommended, men who worked carefully and asked few questions. The roof was replaced. The porch was rebuilt. The wisteria was cut back. The upstairs windows were replaced with new sashes that Iris said her grandfather had been talking about for 30 years and had never gotten around to. The kitchen was kept as it was, with the green enamel stove and the deep porcelain sink and the copper pots on their iron hooks, because Maren did not want the kitchen to change. The calendar with the red circle and the 4 words "She comes, stay quiet" was taken down and put in a frame and hung in the entry hall, where it would be the first thing a visitor saw, though there would not be many visitors, because the inn would not reopen as an inn. It would be a private house, kept by Iris, available to Maren and to Eli for weekends and holidays, and available to a few quiet visitors that Hask would occasionally send up to work with the collection in the cellar, which had been cataloged and shelved and locked behind a new door with a new key that Maren had cut to match the brass one she still carried in her pocket. In the fall of the second year, Maren made the largest decision. She made it after a long conversation with Hask in his office, and a longer conversation with Asher Crane, and a still longer conversation with Carla at her kitchen table on a Tuesday night, with a bottle of wine that Carla had brought over and that Maren had let her drink most of. The decision was this. Maren would keep certain items from the collection for herself and for Eli. The items would include the inventory book, which would never leave the family. The items would include 3 of the books from the wall, which Hask had identified as the 3 he believed most reflected Leland Howard Lyle's particular eye. The items would include a small box of letters that had no significant monetary value but that had been written by people Lyle had known, to people Lyle had loved, and that Maren did not want sold to strangers. The items would include the remaining 3 stones from the pouch, which she would have set, eventually, into a piece of jewelry for Eli's eventual wife if he ever had one, or for some other purpose if he did not. The rest of the collection, she would donate. She would donate it in stages, over several years, to 3 separate institutions, all of them small, all of them serious, and one of them in the county where her grandfather had lived and died. The donations would be made in his name. The named collection at the largest of the 3 institutions would be called the Hollis Holloway Archive, and there would be a small bronze plaque in the reading room with the dates of his life and the words "a private collector who kept these objects safe for 51 years until they could be given to those who would care for them next." The total tax deduction from the donations, spread over 5 years, would reduce her tax obligations on the items she did sell, which she would sell slowly, over the same period, and would leave her, at the end of those 5 years, with a foundation that paid her a comfortable annual income, that paid Iris a comfortable annual income, that funded Eli's college and any graduate education he might want, that supported 3 small organizations Maren had begun to be involved with locally, and that did not, at any point, draw the kind of public attention her grandfather had spent a lifetime trying to avoid. She did not become rich in the way the word is usually meant. She did not buy a large house. She did not move to a different state. She did, eventually, buy a small house in a quiet neighborhood 20 minutes from where she had been living, with a yard for Eli and a room that could be a study, and she paid for it in cash, and the closing took 20 minutes, and she walked out of the title office with the keys in her hand and stood in the parking lot for a long moment and felt, for the first time, that the brass key in her pocket and the new house key in her hand were the same kind of object, and that she had earned the second one with the way she had handled the first one. Her mother did not contest the will. Asher had been right about that. Her mother went silent for almost a year, and then, on a Tuesday in the 3rd autumn, she called. The call was short. Her mother said, "I would like to see Eli." Maren had thought about that possibility a great deal in the year of silence, and she had decided what she would say if it came. She said, "You can see him, in my presence, in a public place, for an hour, twice a year, beginning when he is 8. We will start with a lunch. If the lunch goes well, we will have another. If it does not, we will not. I am not asking you to apologize for anything you have said to me. I am also not pretending that you have not said it. Those are my terms." Her mother was quiet for a long time. Her mother said, "Maren, that is a great deal of structure for a grandmother to accept." Maren said, "Mother, those are my terms. Take them or do not." Her mother said, I will take them. They had their first lunch in the spring of the next year, at a small diner halfway between their two cities, and Eli was 8, and he was polite, and her mother was careful, and the lunch was awkward but not bad. There would be more lunches. There would not be many more than that, but there would be some, and that was something, and Maren had decided that some was enough. Iris Tovey lived for 7 more years. She died, in her sleep, in the small clapboard farmhouse with the chickens still in the coop outside and the orange cat curled on the foot of her bed. Maren had visited her, 2 weeks before, with Eli, who was 12 by then and tall for his age, and Iris had sat on her porch and told Eli a story about his great-grandfather and the way his great-grandfather had built the firebox in the inn's kitchen with his own hands in 1949, and Eli had listened with the careful attention he had always paid to people who took him seriously. Iris had given Eli her grandmother's pocket watch that day, a small gold watch on a fine chain, and she had said, "Your great-grandfather would have wanted you to have something old." Eli had taken it. He had kept it. He still kept it. Iris was buried in the small church cemetery 2 miles from the inn, with a stone that Maren paid for, and that read, simply, Iris Tovey, keeper of a quiet promise. Maren visited the grave whenever she went up to the inn, which was several times a year for the rest of her life. Theodore Hask died the following spring. He had been in his late 80s by then. He left her, in his will, the magnifying loupe she had used so many times across his felt table, and a brief note that said, "The rest of the inventory will be completed by the people I have introduced you to. They will continue to handle your work as long as you wish them to. You have been a kind client. Your grandfather would be proud of how slowly you have done this. Yours, T. Hask." Maren kept the loupe in a small box on the desk in her study. She did not use it. She did not need to. But she looked at it, sometimes, when she was working at the desk in the evenings, and she thought about the man who had given it to her, and about the man who had introduced them, and about the woman who had kept the inn for 43 years on the strength of a quiet promise, and about the brass key in her pocket on the first day, and about the daughter she had been before any of it happened, and about the woman she had become because of it. Eli grew up. He did not become spoiled by the change in their circumstances, because Maren had been careful, from the very first weeks, to teach him that the change was a result of work and patience, and a man who had loved them both before either of them had known it. Eli became, by his teenage years, a serious and curious person, much like his great-grandfather had been, and Maren saw the resemblance more clearly each year, and she did not point it out to him, because she had learned from Maren Holloway that the things you hold quietly are the things that last. Eli went to college on the foundation Maren had built. He studied history. He worked, in his summers, in the small library of one of the institutions that held the Maren Holloway archive, and he sometimes pulled the inventory book out of the locked case where it lived and ran his finger down the columns of Leland Howard Lyle's handwriting and read the names of the items his great-grandfather had kept for him, and he understood, in a way that few young men ever get to understand, exactly where he had come from and what had been kept for him and at what cost. Maren lived a long, quiet life after that. She did not become a public person. She did not give interviews. The collection went into the institutions she had chosen, in stages, over the years she had planned, and the bronze plaques bearing her grandfather's name were installed and were occasionally photographed by visitors who did not know the story behind them. The inn was kept up, after Iris died, by a younger woman from the area whom Maren hired and trusted, and the cellar remained locked, with the brass key kept in a small wooden box on Maren's bedside table, and the box was opened only when Maren went up to the inn herself, which she did at least 4 times a year for the rest of her life. She walked the gravel track from the second iron gate every time. She stood on the porch under the wisteria. She sat in the kitchen with her hand on the green enamel stove, and she thought about her grandfather, and about Iris, and about Hask, and about Carla, and about the moment in Whitfield's office when she had been handed an envelope with a single key and a single sheet of paper and a warning written in 3 sentences, and she had not known yet what any of it meant, and she had carried the key home in her pocket like a person carrying a small live thing she had been asked to protect. She had not known then. She knew now. She had known for many years. And whenever she stood in the kitchen of the inn with her hand on the green enamel stove, she would say, very quietly, the same 3 words that her grandfather had once said to a younger woman at his own kitchen table, the words that had been the beginning of everything he had built and everything he had kept, and everything he had eventually given to her. The words were these: "Pay attention, pay attention, pay attention." And then she would put the brass key back in her pocket, and she would walk out onto the porch, and she would lock the door behind her, and she would go back to the life that he had made possible, and she would live it the way he had hoped she would live it, which was quietly, and well, and for a long time. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.